Walmart in Houston was packed that afternoon. Carts rattled across the shiny white tiles, children tugged at their parents' sleeves, and the hum of announcements crackled over the loudspeakers. Everything felt ordinary, until it wasn't. A sharp, furious bark cut through the noise. Heads turned. At the end of the cereal aisle, a scruffy dog with patchy fur braced on all fours, teeth bared, eyes locked on a man carrying a little girl. The man's plaid shirt clung with sweat, his baseball cap pulled low as if to hide his face. But it wasn't his clothes that froze people in place. It was the child. She dangled limp in his arms, head drooping against his chest, arms lifeless at her sides. Not a cry, not a laugh, not even a twitch. Just silence. "Somebody get that mutt out of here," a shopper shouted. Another woman clutched her own toddler closer, glaring at the ragged figure holding the leash. Phones went up. A chorus of voices grew louder. "That homeless guy again. He's dangerous. Get him out. Call security." The homeless man, thin, weather-beaten, dressed in layers of torn flannel and faded jeans, gripped the leash so tightly his knuckles went white. He stammered, voice rough, almost pleading. "Please, wait. Don't you see? Something's not right." But the crowd didn't care. To them, he was nothing but a nuisance, an unwanted shadow that lingered outside the store doors. The security guard stormed over, shoving him back hard. "Control your animal or you're out," the guard barked. The man stumbled, nearly falling. His dog, however, refused to back down. With hackles raised and a deep growl in his throat, the animal strained forward, eyes fixed on the stranger with the child. The shoppers muttered among themselves, shaking their heads at the homeless man. He looked powerless, humiliated, cornered by suspicion. But what none of them realized was that the moment they were mocking him for would become the turning point of his life. Within minutes, the truth behind his dog's instincts would shatter every assumption in that store. And what seemed like a scene of chaos caused by a homeless drifter and his mutt was about to become the story of how they stopped something far darker. Just a few minutes earlier, before the shouting and the barking, the store had been quiet in its own way. Ordinary lives played out in the aisles, parents checking price tags, teenagers laughing over snacks, an elderly couple comparing cans of soup. Nobody noticed when a man named Caleb slipped inside. Caleb had lived on the streets of Houston for years. His hair was unkempt, his beard rough, his clothes worn to threads. He walked with the kind of cautious shuffle that told everyone he didn't belong. Most people avoided his eyes, pretending he wasn't there. But at his side trotted his one constant, his only family, a wiry, scarred dog named Shadow. Shadow had been with him through storms and cold nights under bridges, through hunger that gnawed at the bones. The two were inseparable. And though people saw only a mutt, Caleb knew better. This dog had saved his life more than once by keeping him away from fights, from men with knives, from corners that smelled of danger. That day, Caleb had only a few coins in his pocket. He wasn't here for much. Just a chance at day-old bread from the discount rack, maybe something to share with Shadow. He kept his head down, used to the stares that said, "You don't belong here." But as they turned into the aisle with bright rows of cereal boxes, Shadow froze. His whole body stiffened, ears pricked forward, eyes locked on something. Then came the sound Caleb feared most. The low, guttural growl that came only when Shadow sensed real danger. "Easy, boy," Caleb whispered, tugging gently on the leash. But Shadow wouldn't move. The growl grew deeper. Caleb followed his dog's stare. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Just shoppers, carts, chatter. Then he saw him. A man in his 40s, plaid shirt buttoned tight, baseball cap pulled low. And in his arms, the little girl, 2 years old, maybe 3. But she wasn't wriggling, wasn't laughing like a child should. Her tiny head lolled against his shoulder, her arms hung limp, and her face was pale as paper. Caleb's stomach dropped. Shadow barked sharply, the sound echoing down the aisle like a siren. A carton of eggs slipped from someone's hands, shattering on the floor. Mothers pulled their children closer. The man holding the girl flinched, muttered something under his breath, and picked up his pace toward the exit. "Hey," Caleb croaked, voice hoarse from years of sleeping rough. "Hey, wait a second." The man didn't turn. His steps grew quicker, boots striking the tile in nervous rhythm. Shadow barked again, straining hard on the leash. The little girl's head rolled to the side, showing a face too still, too pale. Something was wrong, dead wrong. Caleb's chest tightened. He had no authority, no place here. But he knew one thing. He trusted his dog's instincts with his life. And right now, Shadow was telling him the truth no one else could see. Caleb's voice cracked as he tried again, louder this time. "Sir, is the kid okay?" The man finally spun around, his grip on the child tightening. His eyes darted nervously around the aisle. "She's my niece," he snapped too quickly. "She's sick. I'm taking her home." But his voice shook. Sweat ran down his temples despite the cold blast of air conditioning. And the girl, she still hadn't moved. Shadow barked even harder now, lunging forward, teeth bared. The sound rattled through the store like an alarm bell nobody could ignore. Shoppers froze. A woman gasped. Someone whispered, "She doesn't look right." Caleb stepped into the man's path, lifting one hand as if to calm him. His sleeve fell back, showing his scarred, weathered arm. "Just slow down," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Let someone check on her." The man's eyes flicked toward the automatic doors. He shifted his weight like a runner at the starting line. And then, without warning, he shoved Caleb hard in the chest. Caleb staggered backward into a tower of cereal boxes, sending cardboard tumbling across the floor. "Stop him!" Caleb shouted, his voice raw with desperation. The man broke into a sprint toward the exit, clutching the child. Caleb released the leash. "Go, Shadow!" The dog exploded forward like a missile, claws scraping against polished tile. Shoppers screamed, carts toppled, phones went flying as chaos erupted. The man barreled toward the sliding doors, knocking over displays in his way. But Shadow was faster. He leapt over a fallen cart, teeth snapping inches from the man's leg. The stranger stumbled, cursing, nearly losing his grip on the child. Caleb, running on pure adrenaline, hurled himself forward and tackled the man from behind. They crashed to the ground, the little girl slipping from his arms and rolling gently onto the tile. Shadow immediately circled her, barking at anyone who stepped too close. His body hunched protectively over the child. Caleb pinned the man down with a strength he didn't know he had. His heart hammered. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice breaking with fury. The man struggled, spitting curses, his face twisted with defiance. Store security finally burst into the aisle, radios crackling. One guard grabbed Caleb by the shoulder. "Get off him!" he barked, assuming the homeless man was the aggressor. Caleb's eyes were wide with panic. "It's not me, it's him! Look at the kid!" Everyone turned. The little girl stirred faintly, letting out the weakest whimper, her small hand twitching in Shadow's fur. A hush fell over the crowd. And for the first time, people realized the truth. Caleb wasn't the threat. He was the only one who had seen it. One of the guards knelt down, scooping the little girl gently into his arms. Her eyelids fluttered, a faint cry slipping from her lips. The color hadn't returned to her face, but that single sound was enough to send relief through the aisle. The guard looked back at Caleb, then at the man pinned beneath him. "She doesn't even look like you," he muttered under his breath. The stranger thrashed harder, spitting out, "She's my niece. Give her back." But the words sounded hollow now, panicked, desperate. Shoppers who had been frozen in fear began to whisper among themselves. Some raised their phones higher, recording every second. Others pulled their children closer, realizing just how close they'd all come to something unthinkable. The guards exchanged a look and then snapped handcuffs over the man's wrists. Caleb finally released him, his arms trembling from adrenaline. Shadow stayed close to the girl, tail stiff, lips still curled in a warning growl. For the first time, someone actually looked at Caleb, really looked at him. Not like he was a nuisance or a problem to remove, but like he mattered. One of the guards asked quietly, "You stopped him?" Caleb nodded, his chest still heaving. "My dog knew something was wrong," he said simply, voice rough from exhaustion. There was no pride in it, just the truth. Red and blue lights flashed against the front windows minutes later as Houston police stormed inside. Officers pulled the cuffed man to his feet, dragging him out as he screamed obscenities. The girl was passed carefully into the arms of a paramedic, wrapped in a blanket so small it nearly swallowed her whole. Caleb stood back against the shelf, his legs unsteady, Shadow pressed tight against his side. The crowd's whispers had changed now. He caught fragments. That dog saved her. He saw it before anyone else. Thank God they were here. Reporters' microphones appeared almost instantly, cameras flashing as questions were hurled at him. Caleb flinched, unprepared for the spotlight. His voice cracked as he answered the only way he knew how. "It wasn't me. It was him. My dog just knew." Shadow sat proudly at his feet, ears perked, tail thumping once against the tile, as if he agreed. The parking lot outside glowed with the harsh red and blue strobes of squad cars. Caleb stepped into the cold Texas night. Shadow pressed against his leg, both of them blinking under the sudden flood of attention. The man in cuffs was shoved into the back of a patrol car, still shouting, still insisting the girl was his niece. But no one believed him now. Every camera in the lot was pointed at Caleb. Reporters crowded closer, firing off questions. "How did you know? What made your dog react? Are you some kind of hero?" Caleb felt small under the glare, his throat tightening. He shook his head and repeated softly, "It wasn't me. It was him." Shadow saw it first. The little girl was lifted into an ambulance, paramedics working swiftly. One of them gave Caleb a brief nod. "She'll be okay," he said, voice low but sure. Those words struck deeper than Caleb expected. He had spent years hearing nothing but suspicion, dismissal, and silence. Now, for once, he was being told he had done something right. Shadow whined softly as the ambulance doors closed. Caleb bent down, rubbing his dog's ears. "We did good, boy," he whispered. Shadow leaned into him, warm and steady, his eyes still scanning the chaos like a guard on duty. As the crowd thinned, a police officer approached Caleb with a clipboard. His voice was firm, but not unkind. "We'll need a statement. Start from the beginning. Tell us exactly what happened." Caleb swallowed hard. His mind was still spinning, but he managed the words. "He held her wrong. She wasn't moving, and my dog, he knew. I just followed him." The officer scribbled quickly, pausing to glance up. Then he did something Caleb hadn't expected. He reached into a paper bag and pulled out a small bundle of food, sandwiches, an apple, even a bottle of water. He pressed it into Caleb's hands. "For you. And for your dog," the officer said. Caleb froze, staring at the bundle. For years, the only food he'd gotten was what others threw away. Tonight, for the first time, someone had given freely. Not because he begged, but because he earned it. He blinked against the sting in his eyes, clutching the bag as Shadow wagged his tail softly. For the first time in a long time, Caleb felt the weight of dignity settle on his shoulders. And though he didn't know it yet, this night would ripple far beyond the walls of that Walmart. By the next morning, Houston felt different. Caleb and Shadow woke beneath the overpass they usually claimed as shelter. The traffic thundered above them, but it didn't drown out the memory of flashing lights, the crowd, the little girl's faint cry. Caleb reached into the paper bag the officer had pressed into his hands. The food was still there, half a sandwich, a small loaf of bread, and an apple. He tore off a piece of bread and held it out. "You earned this more than me," he whispered to Shadow. The dog crunched happily, tail thumping against the cold concrete. But Caleb couldn't shake the words the man had muttered before the cuffs clicked shut. "They'll kill me if I don't deliver." Deliver to who? And what did it mean? The unease gnawed at him. By noon, curiosity dragged him back toward the Walmart. He thought maybe people had already forgotten. Instead, he found a crowd waiting. A news van was parked at the curb. Cameras swung toward him the moment he appeared. "There he is," someone shouted. Microphones shoved in his face. "Caleb, what made your dog bark? How did you know the girl wasn't safe?" The barrage of questions made his head spin. Shadow pressed close to his leg, barking at the chaos. Caleb lifted his hands, his voice trembling but firm. "It wasn't me. It was him. Shadow saved that girl." The reporters ate it up. Headlines exploded that evening. The homeless man and his hero dog. Photos of Caleb, ragged clothes, weathered face, appeared online beside shots of Shadow, his scruffy fur and bright eyes catching the light. Caleb stood on the sidewalk that night, staring through the window of a diner where a TV replayed his image. Strangers passed him on the street and dropped coins into his cup, some even nodding respectfully. "You're famous now, buddy," Caleb muttered, scratching behind Shadow's ears. The dog barked once, unimpressed, as if to say fame didn't matter. For him, saving lives was just another duty. Days later, detectives tracked Caleb down. They invited him into the police station, a place that once would have terrified him. He sat stiffly on a chair. Shadow curled faithfully at his feet, while officers explained what they'd uncovered. "That man wasn't working alone," one detective said gravely. "He's part of a network moving kids across state lines." Caleb's chest tightened. "So, there are more?" The detective nodded grimly. "Your testimony, and your dog, may have just cracked this case wide open." Caleb swallowed hard. His world had been small for so long. Bridges, sidewalks, alleys. Now, suddenly, the weight of something much bigger pressed down. "You might not realize it," the detective continued, "but you didn't just save one life that night. You may have saved dozens." The news spread like wildfire. Local stations ran the story every hour. Homeless man's dog stops child kidnapping. By the end of the week, national outlets picked it up. The words 28 children rescued flashed across screens, tied back to the tip that had started with Caleb and Shadow in that Walmart aisle. Donations began pouring in. People sent food, blankets, even cash addressed simply to the man with the dog. A church group offered him a place to stay. Animal shelters sent care packages for Shadow, kibble, treats, even a brand new leash. Caleb stared at it all, overwhelmed. He wasn't used to kindness without strings. At first, he slept in the same spot under the overpass, clutching the donated sleeping bag. But things had changed. Strangers stopped to thank him. Shopkeepers who once shooed him away now handed him sandwiches. Children waved when they recognized Shadow. The whispers that used to sting, bum, useless, trash, were replaced with words he never thought he'd hear again. Hero, protector, thank you. One evening, as he warmed his hands by a barrel fire with a few other men from the streets, a black sedan pulled up. A woman stepped out, her eyes red from crying, but her voice steady. "Are you Caleb?" He froze, unsure whether to answer. Shadow bristled at her approach until Caleb gave a small nod. She swallowed, tears glistening. "I'm Lily's mother, the little girl you saved." For a moment, Caleb couldn't breathe. He hadn't even known the child's name. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "They told me I might never see her again. But because of you, because of your dog, she's safe." Her hands trembled as she reached for his. Caleb felt his throat tighten, eyes stinging with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. She insisted on taking him and Shadow to dinner. Caleb shook his head, embarrassed. "I'm not dressed for fancy places." But she smiled through her tears. "You saved my daughter. That's all the dress code you'll ever need." That night, Caleb sat in a warm restaurant for the first time in decades. Waiters served him carefully, unsure what to make of this man in ragged clothes sitting beside a dog gnawing happily on a steak bone. Shadow lay content at his feet, tail wagging. Caleb chewed slowly, savoring each bite like it might vanish if he rushed. Across the table, Lily's mother explained what police had told her. The man caught in the Walmart had been transporting her daughter as part of a larger trafficking ring. Because of Caleb and Shadow, authorities had moved fast enough to stop the transfer of more children. "You didn't just save my little girl," she whispered, her hand tightening around his. "You saved families you'll never even meet." Caleb lowered his gaze, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his existence shift. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He had a purpose. In the weeks that followed, Caleb's name spread further than he ever imagined. News anchors spoke of him with reverence. Social media was flooded with pictures of Shadow, labeled the hero dog of Houston. For a man who had once been invisible, the sudden spotlight felt almost unreal. Charities began to reach out. A local nonprofit offered Caleb a small apartment, just a single room with a bed, a kitchen, and a bathroom. To most, it was nothing. To Caleb, it was everything. Watching Shadow curl up on a warm blanket instead of cold pavement brought him to tears. Adjusting wasn't easy. Caleb often woke in the night, expecting the rumble of trucks overhead or the bite of winter air. Instead, he heard Shadow's steady breathing beside him. The silence felt foreign, almost unnerving. But each morning, as sunlight spilled across clean walls, he whispered a quiet thanks. He found work too. Nothing grand, just stocking shelves and bagging groceries at the very Walmart where everything had happened. The first day he walked in, wearing a borrowed shirt and clean jeans, the staff stared in disbelief. Customers whispered, pointing him out to their children. "That's him. That's the man with the dog." At first, Caleb wanted to shrink back into the shadows. But then, a little boy tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered loudly, "He's a hero." The word made Caleb's chest tighten. He didn't feel like one. But maybe, just maybe, he had earned a different place in this world. One afternoon, while restocking cereal boxes, Caleb overheard two kids whispering near the end of the aisle. "That's him," one said, wide-eyed. "That's the man with the dog." The other nodded solemnly. "He saved a little girl." Caleb felt heat rush to his face, embarrassed yet proud. Shadow, lying faithfully nearby, wagged his tail as if to say, "You did good too." Months later, Caleb received an unexpected letter, an invitation to a police ceremony downtown. Nervous, he almost didn't go. But something told him this was bigger than himself. So he put on the only suit he owned, donated by a church member, and walked into a hall filled with crisp uniforms and polished shoes. Shadow trotted proudly at his side, wearing a shiny new collar gifted by the department. The police chief spoke about courage, about instinct, about heroes who come from unexpected places. Then he called Caleb and Shadow to the stage. Applause thundered through the room as a medal was placed around Caleb's neck, and a smaller one clipped to Shadow's collar. Caleb blinked hard, fighting tears. He leaned down, whispering, "This is for you, boy." Shadow barked once, tail wagging, drawing laughter and cheers from the crowd. For the first time in his life, Caleb stood tall, not hunched in shame, but in quiet pride. He wasn't just a drifter anymore. He was someone who mattered. Despite the applause, Caleb never let the fame consume him. He kept his life simple. Every morning, Shadow ate first. Every evening, Caleb still walked the streets of Houston, stopping by the shelters where old friends huddled in the cold. He didn't lecture them or boast. He just sat down, handed out sandwiches when he could, and said the same words again and again. Don't give up. Sometimes the world notices when you least expect it. People listened, because his story proved it. Shadow became a symbol in his own right. Kids would run up to pet him, their parents snapping pictures. Strangers leaned down to thank Caleb, their eyes full of respect instead of pity. Even the whispers on the street changed. Where once they muttered, "Crazy bum," now they said, "That's the man who saved those children." Caleb also grew close to Lily's family. They invited him to birthdays, holidays, even simple dinners. Lily herself would sprint into Shadow's fur whenever she saw him, her laughter filling the room. Watching her grow strong and healthy filled Caleb's heart with something he hadn't felt in decades, hope. But the memory of the man in the Walmart never left him. "They'll kill me if I don't deliver," the stranger had whispered. It haunted Caleb at night. He often thought of the children who hadn't been found yet, the ones still waiting for someone to notice. One winter evening, while walking past the glowing skyline of Houston, Caleb stopped and looked around. Just months ago, he had been invisible. No one saw him. No one cared. Now, people waved. Shopkeepers offered hot drinks. Children giggled, asking to pet Shadow. He rubbed his dog's ears and whispered, "We made it, buddy. We're not shadows anymore." Shadow barked joyfully at a drifting snowflake, tail wagging as if to agree. For Caleb, the greatest reward wasn't the medal or the headlines. It was knowing that his life, once dismissed as worthless, had meaning again. He carried himself differently now, shoulders back, eyes forward. His scars from the streets remained, but they felt less like marks of shame and more like badges of survival. When strangers asked him the secret, Caleb always smiled and said the same thing. "Listen to your dog. Sometimes they know more than we do." People would laugh, but he meant every word. Shadow hadn't just saved Lily, he had saved Caleb too. And years later, when Caleb looked back, he realized that night in the Walmart had been the turning point. The moment everything changed. He had walked in with nothing. He walked out with purpose, dignity, and a story that would ripple far beyond his own life. Together, a forgotten man and his scruffy dog had proven a truth the world often forgets. Heroes can come from anywhere.